Welcome to the bonfire, unkindled one.
Hey everyone, it's Blue Lizard Jello, and welcome back to Everything Possible in Dark Souls 3. Last time we took a look at the High Wall of Lothric, we defeated Vordt of the Boreal Valley, and then we raised a banner and had some gargoyle friends show up and whisk us away to the Undead Settlement. And that is exactly where we will be heading off to today, but before we do that, we are here in Firelink Shrine and one of our NPCs appears to be missing. Our good friend Hawkwood, the Crestfallen, is nowhere to be found, so let's go ahead and approach this fog gate. And, well, probably just take a quick rest because it is going to take a few seconds to dissipate. Just sit right here, get comfy. Maybe think about life for a moment. Maybe consider what we're having for dinner later. I mean, really, the sky's the limit. And now that that fog wall is gone, let's head outside and go over to the left where we know that there are some unique gravestones, and let's see if maybe he's paying his respects. And sure enough.
The poor wretched souls, be they lord or legend, the curse shows no mercy. What a sham.
And why exactly would he be paying respect to this particular grave? A grave that has a greatsword very similar, if not identical, to the greatswords that are actually surrounding the throne of the Abyss Watchers. Maybe, just maybe, there's actually more to Hawkwood than meets the eye. I'm not saying Hawkwood's a transformer, by the way. And it looks like we have a new face here. Let's head up to the thrones and see who this gentleman might be.
Unkindled, are we? And fast on the trail of the lords absconded? Then these red eyes are for you.
5 cracked red-eye orbs. I wonder why we should be giving these since we're looking for the Lords of Cinders.
Use them to pillage endless and briefly heighten your strength for your duty. What else are unkindled ashes good for?
So this shady fellow just gave us 5 cracked red-eye orbs so we could actually invade other hosts of embers, and we could possibly steal their ember to temporarily heighten our strength, which, as we know, just gives us more health for a limited time. Well, really until we die. But the cracked red-eye orbs, they are consumable, so each one of those is going to be a one-time use, and it will allow us to invade a host of embers and potentially kill them for a reward. That reward can differ dependent on the covenant you're currently in. Before we head out, we have a couple of provisions I'm going to be looking for from Greirat to better prepare for the journey ahead.
Well, now it's time I do my part, huh?
First things first, I'm going to stock up on firebombs, and I'm actually going to buy enough to completely fill my inventory. And the reason is I want to show you the storage mechanic when we actually pick up some firebombs in the Undead Settlement. I debated picking up the bandit's knife, and I even debated picking up the mace, but we'll definitely be buying the mace at a later time. I am, however, going to get the kite shield. I love the fact that it can parry, it has 100% physical defense, and it does have good stability, although you're really not going to see me attempting too many, if any, parries in this episode. And I'm also going to stock up on some fire arrows, although I have to say, hindsight is 20/20, and I learned that many of the enemies that I actually use this on in the Undead Settlement appeared to be somewhat resistant to fire, and the standard arrows actually do a better job. But that's okay. Next, let's talk to Andre. We have a few things we can do with him before heading out. And the first thing we're going to do is actually infuse the Astora Straightsword. I did mention that the raw infusion works very, very well, and as you can see, we will go from 138 damage to 167 just from infusing it with a raw gem. And that is because while it eliminates the scaling, it increases the base damage pretty drastically, and this sword in particular works very well. And now, because we have some Titanite charge from the High Wall of Lothric, we can actually upgrade this not once but twice, and we can get our damage all the way up to 198. And actually, after the Undead Settlement, we'll even be able to get that up to +4 for even more damage. We did pick up an Estus charge, so let's get one more Estus. And I think the 5-to-1 ratio will still work very well in our favor.
Pretty be careful. I don't want to see my work squandered.
And a quick stop at the shrine made because I do want to sell some of the souls that I have. I could have done this at Greirat, but I was passing by. Why not? But these last souls, I'm going to show you the alternate method of consuming the souls. Now, it is actually faster to sell them to the shrine handmade or to Greirat, but if you actually go into the simple menu by clicking R3 on the analog stick, you can then use all the souls without exiting the menu. Still pretty quick. And it looks like we might have just enough souls to level up a couple times, so let's talk to the Firekeeper here, if you wouldn't mind standing up carefully.
Speak thine heart's
Oh,
desire.
I said carefully. You almost fell down the stairs there.
Very well. Then touch the darkness within me. Take me.
And we will put 1 point in strength so we can use the kite shield. And then 1 point in vigor, just a little bit of HP. Give us an edge over the competition.
Farewell, Ashen.
And now all we need to do is actually prepare our inventory. By the way, if you're curious as to what gear I'm using, now's your perfect chance to get a good look at that. As far as weapons go, we're really only going to be using the Astor straight sword and our longbow. And as far as our offhand, we're using the Cleric's Sacred Chime, the Sorcerer's Staff, and we'll be switching out the target shield for the kite shield. Not the Silver Eagle kite shield, just the regular one. Perfect. You can see my armor is still the same as before. And as far as rings, I have the Life Ring, the Coveted Silver Serpent Ring, and the Blue Tearstone Ring. Even though I do have the Skull Ring and the Ring of Sacrifice, I just don't have a need for either of those at the moment, so that 4th ring slot will go unused. And that's okay. We'll find some better rings in this episode. Setting up the hotbar with a few consumables, and I think it's time. So let's head back to the Undead Settlement, where there are loads of items and a few new NPCs to meet. Before we go rushing through the Undead Settlement, I want to actually take a brief moment to investigate the surrounding areas. There's a lot you can see, even from the starting point. For example, right in between those two pillars is the entrance to the arena where we fought Vordt of the Boreal Valley. And then directly below we have this road with a wyvern on it, and we're going to be investigating that a little bit more closely as well once we get down to it, because there's something weird going on with the High Wall of Lothric. We get a large soul of a deserted corpse over here, and now we're going to head down the stairs, but we're not going to rush all the way down to the bottom because an interesting scene is about to play out. By the way, speaking of interesting, we have a tower straight ahead with what appears to be a giant archer perched atop, and this is not the first time we've ever seen a giant archer. We'll talk more about the similarities later on, but also, these birds. What do I even say about them? Some of them were flying backwards, and all of them were flying very poorly. What a mess. We have all of these hollows that appear to be praying or supplicating to this portcullis. And it opens up, and then these 3 dongs get unleashed and just absolutely tear these hollows apart. By the way, it's very interesting that these hollows are not yielding any souls. Now you might say that's because we as the player are not killing them, but as we know from previous experience, any enemy that dies, if they are in our world, we are going to get their souls, and these hollows didn't actually give any. And we're going to see another example of that later on where I do in fact kill a hollow, and I still don't get any. Not trying to fight 3 of these dogs at once. Use my throwing knife to pull this one. I've already killed 1. And using the shield can be really helpful because of the good deflection. They will tend to bounce right off and you can get that attack off. And with our Astor straight sword, 1 light attack is actually killing them. By the way, if you've ever played Demon Souls, this might feel oddly familiar because a lot of these carriages are very reminiscent to those that we've seen in Demon Souls that also had dogs unleashed. Right here, I think this is such a great scene. We have 2 dogs feeding on a corpse, and the item that we're going to pick up off of that corpse is going to give us an idea as to why the dogs were so interested. Because we get a pair of alluring skulls. What we know from the description of the Alluring Skulls is that they were created by evangelists of the Cathedral of the Deep, and we're going to meet them very, very soon. But the way that the Alluring Skulls work is you throw it, it bursts into a cloud of souls, and enemies that are drawn to souls and must feed on souls will be attracted to that cloud, and it can be used very strategically. No, this is not the Great Turtle Migration.
Please, grant me death. Undo my shackles. Oh, then it's true. A champion of Ash as I live and breathe. To be in your presence is a great honor. I am Yoel of Londor, a pilgrim, as you can see, only somehow I failed to die as was ordained. Well, perhaps my calling lies elsewhere. Say, champion of Ash, how does the idea of taking me into your service strike you? I was once a sorcerer. Surely I can be of use.
Considering I find nothing suspicious or odd about you, yeah, sure, why not? I'll see you back in Firelink Shrine.
Honored, truly. I should be dead, yet you have granted me purpose anew. I, Yoel of Londor, do solemnly swear myself to you.
Yoel seems to be the only surviving pilgrim that appear to be making their way to the High Wall of Lothric. In fact, we did see that some pilgrims did make their way there because we saw them just outside of the Vordt boss arena. Very interesting. We pick up a pair of homeward bones, and that's great and all, but there's something very unusual about this area. And to get a better understanding, or at least raise some more questions, let's take a look at the Small Lothric Banner. When the High Wall appeared, the path to the Undead Settlement was blocked, and messengers came bearing this banner. They were sent out with a duty, but had no way of returning. Who were the messengers? Are the pilgrims the messengers? It doesn't seem that the gargoyles are the messengers. I actually don't know what I believe. If you guys have an idea of who the messengers were, please, by all means, let me know. But the banner mentioned that the High Wall of Lothric appeared. What does that mean? Did Lothric not actually exist before this? Was this city actually raised up as it somewhat appears to be? Because as we can see, this road, which has maybe been crushed by this falling wyvern, doesn't really lead anywhere. It does seem to maybe have previously connected up to the High Wall of Lothric. In fact, it might have connected to the arena where we fought Vordt. But now it is not only a huge height differential, but it doesn't even line up spatially. I'm afraid that right now all we can do is raise more questions. I'd love to hear your theories, though, in the comments below. But I would love to hear your theories in the comments below. You guys have some of the best lore theories of anything I've ever read. It's almost a shame that they're always buried on my videos. Opening up this portcullis, we have our first undead worker. Very easily dispatched. They are rather weak. In fact, you're going to see just how weak they are in just a moment. And already we get a bonfire. Pretty interesting. And there is the giant archer doing his thing. What is he firing at? Hopefully not those birds. They're already suffering a fate worse than death, and that is really low resolution. Throughout the Undead Settlement, we have a number of these corpses that are strung up like this one. And even though there is no item on this particular corpse, I want to show that by hitting them with any sort of projectile or even your melee weapon, if you can reach it, will knock them down. And some of them do have some shinies on them, so be on the lookout. Another worker here. Easy enough. And now we have one with a pitchfork, and I want to show you just how weak they are. So I'm going to draw his attention, and then I'm simply just going to roll at him. And as long as I let him recover in between, I can keep him stunned just by rolling at him. It's kind of sad. Granted, they're not wearing very heavy armor. Granted, poise barely works in this game. When you're exploring the Undead Settlement, please take some time to just examine some of the surrounding views, because most of the places that you see are areas we're going to be going to later. They have some incredible viewpoints. Here's an example of a shiny hanging on a corpse, and we get a small leather shield. If you're looking for a small shield with a good parry window, small leather shield works just fine. The stability is low, the physical defense is even lower, but it does parry well. And now we get our very first thrall. We're going to see a number of these, and you might notice that they look actually a little bit reminiscent of our friend Greirat, and there's a reason for that. Unfortunately, I don't pick up one of their hoods in this episode, but from the description we learned that the thrall hood was given to thieves, and we do know that Greirat is a thief from the Undead Settlement, so the fact that he's wearing this hood makes complete sense. Another shiny on a corpse, we're going to knock that down, and that is a particularly important item that you don't want to miss. Speaking of important items, these are not them. Repair powders, they will repair the equipment that you have on you, including your weapon, your armor, your rings. But really, the durability of these items is so high, there's really no need to use repair powders. I haven't had to use one yet. Over here we have ourselves a pair of charcoal pine bundles. Now, unlike resins, which last a full 60 seconds, the bundles of the different types of resins only last about 5 to 7 seconds. They're very short, but these will add 110 fire damage to our right-handed weapon, and while it only lasts a few seconds, it is applied very quickly, so it can actually be used mid-combo. And we can see here, we can scout some thralls below. Pretty easy to get a plunge attack on either of the thralls that we just saw. I like this one because it's a little bit less obstructed. We'll deal with this one, and then over here, on this corpse, we do have another pair of charcoal pine bundles, and as soon as we approach, this third thrall will appear, and, well, frankly, he didn't even notice us. And I just love that satisfying thud of getting that counter hit. Nothing like it. This next courtyard area can be extremely dangerous if you don't handle it correctly. Just taking a quick head count, we can see over a dozen enemies all in one place, and if you don't handle this carefully, you can aggro them all. But the corpse that we knocked down is none other than Greirat's friend, Loretta. And we know this because, as you can see, we just picked up Loretta's bone. But I'm actually going to argue that the bone itself did not come from Loretta's body. Per the item description, a woman's corpse in the Undead Settlement was found clutching this bone, and her name was Loretta. And for some reason, this bone was full of holes that had been bored into it. So I would say that this didn't come from Loretta herself, but this was in her possession. What kind of keepsake this bone actually was, I don't know. I'm really not sure. And maybe it was a bone from her body, and she was forced to hold it as they wrapped her up in linens and hung her up. That's kind of terrifying. We're actually not going to take care of that courtyard now. I'm going to be running the Undead Settlement in a very particular way. I've tested this a number of times, and from my understanding, from my belief, this is actually the most efficient way so you can do everything with the minimal amount of backtracking. Instead of going straight through this building, we do have a somewhat hidden path over here to the right, and as we begin to approach the next building, if we keep our eyes open, we can see there are a few thralls, and they're going to be shooting these darts at us. Fortunately, we have a good shield, and they'll just plink right off. But there are some that are waiting in ambush as well, so you have to be watching out for them. Just let them bounce off of your shield deflection. Keep approaching. Watch out for the corners, because you can see this one right here. We can actually just dead angle him. Perfect, and then one more small ambush. Easy enough, get that counter. And do not miss this corpse. Trust me. Take the hits if you have to, because a fading soul only comes around once in a lifetime. Okay, that might not be entirely accurate. Also, with this thrall, it's best to just intimidate him to just jumping off the roof. That's right. And don't let me see you up here again. And over here we get 6 firebombs, and what you can see directly under where it says firebomb, there's a symbol there. That is indicating that because we already have the maximum amount that we can currently hold, those 6 will now be in our storage. So if we need a replenishment and we sit at a bonfire or we die, we can pull them from storage. And then we pick up the plank shield, which is frankly a really terrible shield. In fact, from the description itself, it states that the shield offers minimal protection and at the cost of moderate humiliation. And here we have this somewhat terrifying looking creature, but don't attack it.
Sir Granton carries a cage. He ever has his cage.
And Nana's never coming back. So come into the cage and become Nana's shade.
Easily one of the most cryptic sets of dialogue that I've ever heard, but I think it's going to be made clear in just a moment here, once we deal with one more thrall and then hop down. Over here we have 2 more homeward bones. And then if you want to avoid fall damage, you can go ahead and just carefully walk down onto this ledge and you should be fine. But before we go forward, here's another good example of how you can actually avoid an ambush just by paying attention. You can see behind that house we have 2 dogs surrounding an item, so we have to be very careful when we get closer. But now we have this terrifying giant undead wielding what looks to be a double-handed saw and a cage on his back. But didn't we just hear reference to actually going inside a cage? And in fact, if we get to the back of this enemy who is neutral to us, we can examine it. And we will do that. Just a minute here. Maybe that group of hollow cage individuals wasn't so crazy. One thing to do before we examine that cage is we see the shiny on a corpse. The problem is this corpse is hanging very precariously over this ledge. And while if I had Spook activated I could make that fall, I don't want to fall down there just yet. And it is possible to get this item. Unfortunately, you can't just walk up to it and examine it. But if we knock down the corpse and then very quickly interact with it, we can actually get it before it falls. And there we go, the Flame Stoveplate Ring. Don't worry if you do miss it, you can get it from below, and I'll show you how to do that later on. The Flame Stoveplate Ring is going to increase your fire damage absorption. The problem is, the higher your current fire damage absorption, the lower the effectiveness of this ring will be. You can see over on the right hand side, I'm getting about 10 points of fire damage absorption, which really isn't that bad. In fact, it is going to prove useful later on. But now let's climb in the cage, and I guess become Nana Shade? Seems like a perfectly rational and logical thing to do. It's a shame that they only use the cages once. We really live in such a disposable culture. Who is that off in the distance? And frankly, where are we? While we haven't been here before, we will be here again in this very large, I guess, underground cavern. There are roots of some very large trees and cages just like the one that we were just transported in all over the place, and just corpses littering the sides of this cavern. Well, we do see someone over there on the other side, so let's go over and talk to him, and maybe he'll shed some light on where we are or what we're doing here. Or, like everyone else in Dark Souls, he's just going to confuse us.
Well, what's happened? This pit is for hollows, not for the likes of you sane folk. Or perhaps you are a hollow, posing as otherwise?
Yes?
Yes, then we are just fine. It's important to know who you are, but we'll all be mad soon enough. And should you be undead, well, all the more so. Beware, the shackles of the gods are fragile. You might need this. Etch it on your heart if you feel your sanity slipping.
And this individual gives us the Mound Maker's Covenant item.
Come here to pile up your victims, for that will form your anchor. You'll see when you go mad. They'll be your family. You'll go mad one day, but not today. Take my advice. Use this bone and leave this place.
And he does give us a homeward bone, since that appears to be the only way out.
And for the occasional madman fond of piling up victims. You've better things to do, I'd hope. This pit is for hollow.
This is Holy Knight Hodrick, and we're actually going to see him again, even just later on in this episode. One thing to keep in mind, we won't know this fully until later on in the story, but he seems to have familial ties to some other NPCs in the game. The Mound Maker's Covenant is a very chaotic covenant. It affects the way you actually engage in co-op or invasions. If you use your white sign soapstone with this covenant item equipped, your sign will actually appear purple to a host and will ask if they want to summon you as a mad phantom. If they do summon you, you can co-op just like normal. You can go and attack enemies, although you can't help with the boss, or you can actually attack the host or any other co-operators he has with him. If you invade using a cracked red eye orb, the red eye orb, or a red sign soapstone, then you can't actually attack or be attacked by the enemies, but you can attack the host, any co-op partners, or any other invaders. And over here we get the War God Wooden Shield. I'm not going to say too terribly much about the shield right now, but I believe it actually has some really significant lore impacts that we're going to learn about later on. So just for now, keep this shield in mind. Keep in mind the design, keep in mind the War God and the fact that it's spelled as one, and the description that says the bizarre pattern featured on the shield is the mark of a mad god, revered as a god of war in remote regions. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Back here, this inconspicuous looking candle area is actually the sacrificial altar, and this is where you can offer vertebra shackles to the Mound Maker Covenant. If you offer 10, you will achieve rank 1, which will give you Bloodlust, which is a katana, and if you offer 30, you will achieve rank 2, and you will be given the Warmth Pyromancy, which will actually heal you over time. And how do you actually get the vertebra shackles? Well, we'll get one later on in this episode, but the other way is when you're in the Mound Maker's Covenant, if you invade or if you get summoned as a mad phantom into a host world and you kill them, you'll be given a shackle, or if you actually kill an invading Mound Maker, then you'll get their shackle. You can also farm these from skeletons later on in the catacombs, but the drop rate is very, very low. It's actually really easy to achieve all 30 if you work with a friend and use the password system and just summon each other. So we use the Homeward Bone to go back to the bonfire, and now we're just going to quickly run through these few enemies we've already killed. No new items to get just yet. I really wish these thralls had actually dropped some of their equipment. Their axe is actually a pretty cool little item. But alas, nothing as of yet. Good thing there are a number of thralls to go. And now we're back at this courtyard and we have to deal with all of these enemies, but if you're smart and if you're observant, you will find a creative solution to almost half of your problems. You see, these undead workers have a terrible habit of standing next to these combustible barrels. They also suffer from immense hearing loss and apparently don't hear when their barrels and their friends explode. Good for us, bad for them. So 6 are already down. Should be able to quickly dispatch of these 3 before anyone actually gets too close to us. And here we have our very first evangelist. And right off the bat, because we're at range, she's going to cast the Gnaw spell. It doesn't actually do a whole lot of damage even if you don't block, but you can see the bleed buildup is pretty rapid, so you have to be careful of that. Now the evangelists come from the Cathedral of the Deep, which we can see from the Undead Settlement, and as we know from earlier, they did create the Alluring Skulls, so they seem to be dabbling in items that actually would lure people, maybe into a false sense of security. We just saw the other spell that they'd like to cast, which is Immolation. They will set themselves on fire, and then they'll try to give us a nice, comfortable, and warm hug, but I recommend not allowing her to do that. The Evangelists can be really good to farm. You can actually get their entire armor set, you can get that giant spiked mace, you can get Titanite shards, and even very rarely, you can get Blessed Gems for Blessed Infusions. With her out of the way, we'll just deal with the other undead workers before we go ahead and loot all the corpses around us. Now that the area is safe, I can pick up a Soul of an Unknown Traveler while my gentle prayer restores my health. We have an Estus shard, good for 1 free Estus from Andre the Blacksmith. We have an Ember, and then right overhead, if we look carefully, we have a corpse with a shiny on it. Now, I could use my bow, but I want to show you, even if you don't have a bow, maybe you don't have the dex to actually wield one, you can use any thrown item to knock them down as long as your manual aim is good enough. And we get 9 kukris. Let me tell you how much I love the kukris. I'm going to be saving them for a few particular spots down the road, but these are throwing knives that also cause bleed damage, and they can be fired very, very rapidly, so for any enemy that's weak to bleed, these can be immeasurably helpful. Just a few more undead workers to deal with. Now, we're actually not going to be proceeding through these buildings, although we are going to clear them. We get a Titanite shard here, and then down here, we have a pair of thralls that are overlooking this one hole. We're going to take care of them now, because they are actually trying to set up an ambush for us later on. So we deal with 1, and we deal with 2. You can see that they had positioned themselves just over this hole, so we would nonchalantly walk underneath and they would plunge on us, and you don't want to be surrounded by thralls. Maybe you do. I don't actually know what you're thinking right now. Running up this short hill, in under this archway, we're going to open this door and peer inside, but just to give ourselves a point of reference later on when we actually do some backtracking through this area. But that's for next time. So for now, we've gotten all the loot, we've killed all the enemies, we're going to head back to the bridge, where we killed the 2 undead workers before we actually went to the right and headed over to the Mound Maker's Covenant, but now we are going to go through this building. Just be careful, because the one in the back does tend to throw fire bombs, so if you get staggered by him, it does allow the other undead worker to get some hits off. Who am I kidding? Just roll into them. Couple of undead workers with pitchforks, which is actually surprisingly fitting considering they were asleep in some haystacks. Large soul of a deserted corpse, and then straight ahead we have another thrall, but this one is a little tougher and is wielding a different weapon than the others. This thrall actually has the flamberge. You can see that I'm actually getting some bleed buildup even though I'm not taking any damage. The flamberge is a really good bleed weapon. In fact, it's not a bad sword in general, and this is the earliest you can actually get a flamberge. I wasn't so lucky, but if you do want to farm that thrall for one, he has a good drop rate. And inside here, we have this one shiny. Just be careful because there are thralls overhead that might try to hit you with their darts. And we get the caduceus round shield. Now, being that this is a small wooden shield, we know from previous experience that the small wooden shields are good at magic damage reduction, and this one is no exception. It does block 63% of the magic damage, but other than that, it's fairly unremarkable. Yeah, I know you saw those barrels. So before we go forward, I want to kill at least this one firebomb throwing undead worker because he is going to make our job very difficult if we don't deal with him now. And this is where I learned that the fire arrows are actually not doing nearly as much damage as the standard arrows. And now I know for next time. But the reason I wanted to take care of him is because I don't want to actually rush forward, I want to drop below. Taking a look here, everything looks okay. In fact, if we look over here, we even see a free shiny, which is great. So let's go ahead and use our spook spell. It's why we have it in the first place. And we'll just defy gravity for a moment before hopping down. And there was one enemy over here that we couldn't quite see, but nothing we can't handle. And we get another Titanite shard. But even better than Titanite shard is what's actually located directly underneath this archway. Our next bonfire. Now before we proceed, I want to show you how great of a vantage point this spot is. From this spot, we can see a number of these giant undeads with their cauldrons or their crucibles. We can even see an evangelist, who I lovingly refer to as Old Mama Murphy. But if you have a ranged weapon like a bow, you can pick off all of these enemies with very little to no danger to yourself. There's another one of those large undead, but we'll deal with him momentarily. First, another shiny on a corpse here. And if you are someone who likes to turtle behind a shield, this is actually better than most spears. This is the Partisan. It is a spear weapon, so it does mostly thrust damage, but it also does have some standard attacks because you can sweep it from side to side, as well as the actual weapon skill itself is the spin sweep. So you will actually spin around, and if you use a heavy attack following it, you'll do an overhand strong attack smash, and it does some pretty good damage. So if you like keeping enemies just outside of their reach, Partisan might actually work out really well for you. Now we know that there are 2 more undead workers up here that were throwing firebombs at us. So while this is completely unnecessary, let's get the drop on them with Spook. Easy peasy. I hope I never use that phrase again. Oh look, another cage. This one's occupied though.
Aha, unkindled, are we? Welcome to my abode. I am Cornyx, an old pyromancer. A crow in his cage, as you see now. But here we are, an encounter for the ages. I hear the unkindled make for fine vessels. Care to learn some pyromancies from this old man?
Haven't said no to anyone yet.
Most wise. A chance encounter should not be squandered. To reiterate, I am Cornyx of the Great Swamp. The pleasure is mine.
So let me get this straight. Once again, we meet an NPC who's locked away and who can teleport away at any moment? Okay. Why didn't you do that before? At any rate, we get the hand axe, which is the starting weapon of the pyromancer class, and actually I really like the hand axe. Even though the damage isn't anything special, it's very quick, so if you're going up against a quick enemy, this might be enough to actually stagger them so you can get the first hit. And it also has the Warcry weapon art, so you can get added bonus, at least for a limited time. But now let's deal with that large undead below us. And if you want to get some good damage right away, I think you know what to do. Now, unfortunately, I switched to firebombs because I was really hoping there was still some combustible barrels left, because typically you can just lead him over here and then throw a firebomb and he's done. We're gonna have to go at this the old-fashioned way. One thing to keep in mind with these enemies that are holding their cauldron or the crucible, whatever it is, they will deal some shock waves, and even though you won't take damage from it, it can stun you, so you want to give them a wide berth. We have a solo and unknown traveler here, and just behind, we have a hollow here that seems to be guarding over this one corpse, and I tried to kick him off, to no avail. But this is that other hollow that I was talking about earlier that won't actually give us any souls. And at first, I didn't really think anything of it. But then after I pick up the fire clutch ring here, I realized that he seemed to be lamenting over this corpse, like it was someone that he knew, someone he cared about. He had no interest in me or what was going on around him. He was only fixated on this one corpse. I actually take out my binoculars to take a look and see if there's anything unique about it, but frankly, it's pretty straightforward to me, although it's pretty grotesque. If you have any ideas as to what this hollow is doing or why he doesn't care about us, let me know. But going back to the actual game itself, we got the fire clutch ring, which is a really interesting ring. This ring, when worn, will increase any fire damage that you do by 15%, but it also increases the physical damage that you take by 10%. And when I say it boosts all the fire damage, I mean all of it. From pyromancy spells, fire bombs, any buffs, torches, fire-infused weapons, you name it. Don't get tricked by this thrall. Let him come to you. And a large soul of a deserted corpse, honestly, if you don't want to come back here and get it, I'm not going to blame you. And look at me, running past neutral hollows. You know what, I'm not sure, and I kind of wish I had gone back and tested this. I wonder if they will give souls. I'm not sure. Bounce off the shield, kill the dog, pick up an ember. All in a day's work. Now, anytime you're fighting against a dog and another enemy, back up and let the dog come to you because they're always going to be faster than the other enemy that they're accompanying. And just one more worker up here to deal with. Easy enough. And then we have these large doors that, you probably already guessed it, don't open from this side. But there are a couple of developer messages here, such as, Great Curse-Ridden Tree ahead. And then over here on the side of the stairs, a transposing kiln lies within the belly. Now, we actually learned from Ludleth of Cornland back in Firelink Shrine that if he had a transposing kiln, he would be able to transpose twisted souls into unique items. So that's pretty exciting. I looked up and gave you just a bit of foreshadowing as to where we might be going next. But first, we do have a few enemies in the way. First and foremost, this evangelist. Get her attention, then let her come to us. And fortunately, she didn't actually stay back and do her Gnaw spell. And she did the immolation, which is one of the best moves that they can do because it is easy to dodge and opens them up for a backstab very easily. And here I am finally using my weapon skill. Another Titanite charge, just a couple more of those, and we'll be able to upgrade the Astoris Straight yet again. But before we cross that bridge and deal with all those other undead, let's head into the sewers. Don't worry, this sewer section is very short. By the way, have you noticed every game tends to have a sewer section? Why is that? Is that some sort of general guideline or even rule that all game developers have to follow? Once we get past these few rats, we can get the Kestis. In fact, we actually get the Kesti. We get a pair of them. These are some fist weapons, and you can see the skill is Perseverance, which means you cross your arms in front of you and you temporarily boost your poise, and your damage is reduced while it's activated. It is very interesting, and not only is it one of the very few fist weapons that the game has to offer, not only do you get the Perseverance skill set, but you can also parry with the Kestis, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. Once I actually switch to two-handed mode, you can see I can punch very, very rapidly. And here's the Perseverance skill. But then, if I actually go back to one-handed mode, look at how quick this parry is. The Kestis, even though it doesn't have the largest parry window, it has the fastest opening parry. So if you actually learn how to parry and you can actually read enemy attacks, the Kestis can work very, very well as a parry item. Can't get in this door just yet, but we will be back later. And here I'm going to show off another weapon skill, the longbow. Now, you could have actually used this against the wyvern in the Undead Settlement and it would have gone a little bit faster, but you have a higher tendency to miss with this skill unless you can actually get locked on. Killed one rat. Now we can kill number 2, and maybe there's a third one waiting in the wing. Ah yes, Big Brother joins the fight. Very easy because they stagger at every hit and we get the Bloodbite Ring. This is an excellent time to get the Bloodbite Ring because this will increase your bleed resistance by 90 points. One thing to note is that the bite rings are native to Carim. Now we haven't met anyone from Carim yet, at least not that we know of, but we're about to. Now, I left the flame stone plate ring on because I actually was confused as to where I was going next. It is going to be useful later on, but the Bloodbite ring is actually going to be better off for us now because there are a number of enemies that we face that do inflicted bleed buildup. In fact, we're going to see one such enemy in just a second here. Now I'm approaching this area very cautiously because we have a bonfire to the left, we have an enemy to the right, and we have a crystal lizard straight ahead. Now I want to get that crystal lizard before he has a chance to get away. So I'm going to approach slowly and quietly until I can get close enough and I can sprint in, but at the same time, we're not even alone as far as this enemy is concerned. Because if you're embered in this area, you will be invaded by Mad Dark Spirit, Holy Knight Hodrick. But before he gets to us, let's kill this crystal lizard and get a sharp gem, which will be used for sharp infusions. The sharp infusion will add or increase any dex scaling. Now, fortunately, it doesn't actually eliminate all strength scaling, but it does lessen it. But we won't actually be able to use the sharp infusion until we give Andre the Farron Cold that we'll find in a later area. But let's talk about this invasion. We just got invaded by Holy Knight Hodrick, who is the same individual that allowed us into the Mound Maker's Covenant. As I said, this covenant is absolute chaos. Because he invaded us, if we are able to actually kill him in our world, we will be rewarded with a vertebra shackle. Just keep in mind that Hodrick really isn't a pushover, and he has a number of things at his disposal, including the Flamberge. He can also use Estus Flask to heal. He can use the Power Within Pyromancy to boost his damage at the cost of his own health. He can also use the Warmth Pyromancy to actually regenerate his health. So fighting Hodrick, even though you do want to play somewhat cautiously, if you get aggressive, you can actually back him into a corner and just spam your attacks, drain his Estus, and kill him without too much challenge. Just be careful because he can also parry you. He's not great at it particularly, but if he lands it, that Flamberge is going to do a lot of damage. And here he is casting Power Within, so he is going to take some continuous damage. But as long as you stay on him, he's not too bad. And with him defeated, we get our very first Vertebra Shackle. As we've already talked about, we can turn this in at the Sacrificial Altar, so we can actually work towards ranking up our Mound Maker's Covenant, or we can trade this into the Crows for a very special item. Not going to spoil that, I'm going to show you in the next episode. With the bonfire lit, we're actually going to go back through the sewers and head over to the bridge where we saw all of the undead with their crucibles. The most important thing I wanted to do over there was actually kill the crystal lizard, because getting him from the other side can actually be a bit troublesome. Luckily, I learned my lesson earlier, and I'm using standard arrows to take this guy out. And I like to get the attention from this side of the bridge, because if you try to fight them on the bridge, well, they have this move. And if that hits you, it will send you reeling, potentially over the edge, and you will most likely die. It's not an automatic kill box, so if you have enough health, or you have the Silver Cat ring on, or if you have Spook activated, you will survive, but why risk it? So now for the first time, we're fighting these enemies with their other weapon, which is a giant machete. Although, well, technically they dropped the giant machete, but it doesn't quite look like this. They will use a lot of combos in succession. So just plan your attacks carefully and roll under an attack to get around them and just let them keep going. On the bridge, we get an ember, and we can look down below. We see a crystal lizard, some loot. But in order to go down there, we will need a key to open up the locked door that was in the sewers. We have a large soul of a deserted corpse, and if you remember, this is the house that had a pair of dogs behind it. Let's see if we can get their attention off of us. Granted, it tends to work a lot better if you throw it further on without locking on, but I made the best out of a bad situation, I think. And then what were they guarding? Of course, more alluring skulls, because that's what they're attracted to. And I don't question what they're attracted to each his or her own. Shouldn't have been so difficult to get over that wall, but I made it. And now, instead of killing him, I'm just gonna send him elsewhere. I mean, one of his friends is down there, so at least he's not alone. I'm not a monster. We're gonna talk about that fog gate, because that fog gate is not supposed to be here. And it's a bit frustrating it hasn't been fixed yet.
Another one of those unkindled, are you? All you faceless undead, behaving as if you deserve respect. No matter. Heed my words. If you've any sense, you'll go find a coffin to huddle up inside. You, here, in this land of hollows. You're like a frail maiden on the front lines. If, like the others, you're fool enough to play the champion, then go on ahead. Traipse right past the abandoned church. You'll face death. And it won't be pretty. Enough death to leave you broken. Time after time.
So this is Egon of Carim, and if you remember when we were talking about the Bloodbite ring, we had mentioned that those rings are native to Carim, and it just so happens that we just met Egon, and inside that cell is his charge arena.
You like poking around in cells, do you? How very genteel. Ah. Taking an interest in her, have you? Well, she's a lost cause. Couldn't even become a firekeeper. After I brought her all this way and got her all ready. She's beyond repair, I tell you.
And considering that Arena is a cleric, and we know from the description of the Bloodbite ring that clerics often use the bite rings, I would say that the ring most likely belonged to her. Also, you just noticed that I looked up at the corpse. That is the corpse that contained the flame stoneplate ring, and this is where you can shoot it down from, or you can collect it if you've already knocked it down. Also, looking down into the ravine, there's another corpse to shoot down. You don't want to miss it. Now, this fog gate should not be here, but unfortunately, if you're playing offline, once you get invaded by the Holy Knight Hodrick, there is a chance that this fog gate won't dissipate, but just quit the game and come back in, and it will disappear. No harm, no foul. One thing to keep in mind, and we're going to see this in just a moment, any enemies that you didn't kill will be reset to their original positions. So those giant undead wielding their crucibles that fell into the ravine, they're not going to be in the ravine anymore. And if you've played Dark Souls 1, get ready for a familiar face, or voice, or at least vegetable.
Oh. Pardon me, I was absorbed in thought. I am Siegward of Catarina. To be honest, I'm in a bit of a pickle. Have you ever walked near a white birch only to be struck by a great arrow? Well, if I'm not mistaken, they come from this tower. Whoever it is, I'm sure I can talk some sense into them. But I have to find a way up, and that's just the trouble. This lift only goes down, you see, and... Well, that doesn't get me anywhere. This lift only goes down. But you know, with a little warming up, eventually... No. I've got to use my head and think.
I don't think anyone has ever accused any Knight of Catarina of being too intelligent. See what I just did? Siegward? I just stepped on the switch and then stepped off. And look. No? Not even interested? You just want to hang out down here? Alright, well bye. And don't forget to pick up this shiny on the corpse hiding around the corner, Soul of a Nameless Soldier. And then we have this staircase that leads up, and apparently, according to Siegward, we're looking for someone who's raining down giant arrows. And I wonder if it's this fella right here. The big friendly giant. Just like Roald Dahl wrote about. But if we take a look, it's really interesting because clearly this giant at some point in time was held captive somewhere. Looks like there are some bolts sticking into his legs that could have held chains, or chains draping all over his torso. But he's such a nice giant.
Anytime.
And as long as you agree to make peace, he'll give you a young white branch. And this is a unique young white branch. If you use it, it will turn you into something in the environment, so you can use it sort of like the chameleon spell. But this one also says, good friend, no hit. This is a token of friendship that the giant has given you. And as long as you have this on you, or if you take the young white branch as a starting gift, a burial gift at the beginning of the game, anytime you approach these white birches, even though he will continue shooting his arrows down, you will not take damage. It's actually a really good tactic because there are 3 white birches. One in the Undead Settlement we just saw, one over here in the Cathedral of the Deep, and then one way down there where those 3 burning towers are in Farron Keep. And you can actually use those very strategically, and the giant will help you take out the enemies. If you kill the giant now, you will get the Hawk Ring, which will extend your bow range, a ring that used to belong to Hawkeye Goth. But I encourage you not to kill him because you can use his arrows and his offense very, very well in the areas to come. Besides, you can get the ring later. Walk off just a little bit down the elevator so you can land on this platform, basically as soon as you start to hear Siegward. I'll go ahead and top off my health with my gentle prayer because we're going to talk to him again. And out in the distance, we see something lumbering about.
Don't disappear like that. You had me downright worried. But thanks to you, an epiphany has struck me square in the head. I've unraveled the riddle of this inscrutable lift. On some days I begin to doubt myself. I went up the tower, so I thought, then somehow ended up here. I'm not exactly sure what happened. Anyhow, do you see that? That humongous beast? I'm no coward and I've a steady hand, but that thing makes my skin crawl. How now? Think twice before you go down that road.
You know, Siegward, there's something about your story that's not adding up. You see, I took the elevator up, and I never sent it back down. In fact, when I came back down from seeing the giant, it was still up there, so explain yourself. How exactly did you get to that ledge? No? Nothing? Katarina magic? Grab this homeward bone, and then we're going to get just close enough to get this fire beast's attention. Well, frankly, I'm going to get his attention by shooting an arrow just past him. I didn't want to hit him because I felt like that would give me too much of an edge.
No! You should have waited! Well, it's too
Now,
late
something
now.
else that the Knights of Katarina have never been known for is actually survivability. But you know what? Siegward can hold his own. In fact, at this point, he's invincible. He actually can't get killed by this beast, at least not to my knowledge. I've seen him get smashed time and time again, but he just keeps coming back for more. So if you're having a hard time with this beast, there are a couple things you can try. Number one, just let Siegward do it. Just stay back, keep your shield up, use the flame stone plate ring so the fire damage doesn't hurt you too badly, and just let him do his thing. The other option is to stay up on top of the roof before I jump down and just shoot arrows. Eventually you'll get his attention, he'll get close, but he can't get to you. There is a large AoE attack, and if you see that, you're going to want to run way back on the roof, put your shield up, and hope for the best. The shield will actually block most of the damage, and the flame stone plate ring will also help to whittle it down. But he's not too bad because Siegward is quite the companion in this fight. And he will give you a fire gem. That's the second one guaranteed that we've gotten.
That was quite a performance. But you mustn't get in over your head. We unkindled must put our duties first. But, for the moment, we've a toast to make.
And he gives us the Siegward. The Siegward will restore your HP, it'll boost your frost resistance, and you can get up to 3 of these from Siegward if you follow his questline. But more importantly, you can trade it to the crows for a very special piece of equipment.
Long may the sun shine.
And with drink in hand, we can get the toast gesture.
Well, I'm going to have myself a little nap. The only thing to do, really, after a nice toast.
Now that sounds like a Knight of Catarina. Don't forget to talk to him one last time, and you can skip through this quote-unquote dialogue so you can get the sleep gesture. And that is the first leg of Siegward's quest. It's going to be a little while before we see him again. Well, we'll hear him again before we see him again, but you'll see what I mean later. If you're looking for a strike weapon and you have the strength to wield it, the large club isn't bad. We're probably not going to be using something as heavy, but having a strike weapon is going to serve us very, very well in an upcoming area. And let's just go ahead and shoot this corpse down nice and easy. And by easy, I mean make sure you account for that enormous hitbox emanating from that piece of wood. Okay, sure, why not? And there's another corpse on the right side of this little shack. Apparently it's still wriggling. Physics at work. And on this corpse we get a pale tongue. Pretty gross how some of the Covenant items work in this game. The pale tongue is a reward for a successful invasion. So if you use a cracked red eye orb or the red eye orb and you kill the host and you're not in one of the covenants that actually impacts a Covenant item like mound makers, you will get a pale tongue. Now, we met an NPC who wanted us to go out there and invade, so maybe, now that we've got the pale tongue, we should go back and talk to him. On this other corpse, we get the entire northern armor set. Really good damage absorption, it is a little heavy, and this is also the starting armor of the warrior class. Over here we get a pair of red bug pellets. Consuming a red bug pellet will increase your fire absorption by 15% for an entire minute. We're actually going to be using that to get some hard to reach items in a much later area. Now be careful here. You've probably already noticed that these cages are shaded slightly different than the ones around them, and if you actually try to target them, you can. So we're going to go ahead and use the skill of the longbow to take them out. I absolutely love these enemies because their damage resistances make sense. They are actually resistant to standard attacks, to slashes, because they're in a cage. If you were to actually slash across a cage, chances are you're just going to ricochet off the bars. But they're very weak to thrust damage, including arrows, because thrust damage will actually make it through the bars. And I just love the logic behind that. Using an alluring skull, by the way, we did just pick some more up. We can get that one dog's attention, and then just one more to deal with. And before we go into the next room, there are no items over here, but I just find this so interesting. There are these corpses, these former hollows sitting in some rocking chairs, and it looks like they're turning into a tree. Now we've already seen this motif in the High Wall of Lothric, so why are hollows turning into vegetation? Is it part of the curse? Now the only other time that we've seen this is when giants are turning into trees. Maybe there's a relation. Now if you run in there and you open that chest, even though it's not a mimic, you do have something else to worry about. And no, it's not just my bad aim, it's these cages, these hollow cages, suspended from the roof, that want nothing more than you to try to open up that chest so they can surround you. You can see here, just one thrust attack from my Historic Straight Sword, it does so much damage. And it's really overkill because they're almost dead just from the one arrow. And inside the chest, we get human pine resin. Really disgusting in nature, I know, but very valuable, and it's something we're not going to be getting too many of in our possession until later on. The human pine resin will apply a dark buff to your weapon, give you 95 dark attack damage, and it'll last for an entire minute. And now we have a pair of evangelists, and trust me when I say you don't want to fight them at the same time. So do what it takes to pull one away from the other. In this case, I'll lead with a longbow weapon skill shot, and now I'm just going to dance around this Gnaw skill until she gets tired of casting it. Unfortunately, she really doesn't get tired very easy. Hopefully I can bait her other attacks like Immolation Hug. Perfect. And now she just wants to go and join her sister again. One down, one to go. Now it's pretty easy to sneak up and get a backstab. It's even easier to sneak up and miss a backstab. Perfect. Watch the Immolation Hug. We knocked her out of the animation, which is fantastic, and down she goes. And now this area is perfectly clear. Heading outside, we have a great view of the area we've just gone through, and there's poor sleeping Siegward. He's just so plum-tuckered out. Up here on this balcony, grab the Flynn's Ring. Or don't, because frankly, it's not very good. If you use the Flynn's Ring in Dark Souls 2, like me, you might have just gotten very excited to pick this up. Unfortunately, it is borderline useless. You can get up to a 15% damage increase. This is true. However, in order to do that, you would essentially need to be naked and wielding nothing but a dagger or maybe a broken straight sword, because this time around it is not based on your equip burden percentage, it is based purely on your actual weight. For every weight unit you go up, the Flynn's Ring goes down in effectiveness. If you're trying to use this with a greatsword, even if you're naked, you will only see just a few points of damage increase, and it is just not worth a ring slot. Such a shame. Poor Flynn. Couple of drops, so I'm going to go ahead and use Spook. Don't want to use up any more of my HP if I don't have to. And before we go inside the tower, make sure you loop around and you can grab the homeward bones here. And then there is another substantial drop, so I'm going to be safe and recast Spook. If you don't have Spook and you want to play it safe, you can see that there is the ledge kind of forward and to the left. You can just run or jump to that. You will take some fall damage there and from the next fall, but if you have Spook, you can just drop all the way down. And ladies and gentlemen, you can get the Mirror Vest, gloves, and trousers. The armor of one of my favorite NPCs in any of the Souls games, Lucatiel.
My name is Lucatiel. I beg of you, remember my name.
Now I know what you're saying, you're missing the mask, and that's the most important part of that armor set. And it's true, we are missing it. For now. Give it just a little bit of time. We'll have it. Here I am just going through and actually choosing some higher absorption armor. I don't like the way those pants look though, so don't worry, they're going to be going soon. And before you leave, make sure you roll through these boxes and pick up the Chloranthy ring. And this ring tends to be a staple in a lot of builds because this will increase your stamina regeneration. Every build can benefit from having increased stamina regeneration. Not only does it increase it, but it also stacks with other items that we'll find throughout the game that increase stamina regen, like the green blossoms that we already have. Very, very useful. And that is actually the last item we're going to collect. So for now, we're going to head back to the bonfire, and as you might have noticed, the video is about to end, which means I did have to cut this up into 2 parts. There is just so much to do in the Undead Settlement, and there's so many NPCs to talk to, it took far longer to get through this and to do everything possible than I had originally intended. But I really hope that you learned something or at least found something interesting in this video, and if you did, please leave me a comment below and let me know exactly what that was. And if I missed something, you know the drill, you have to let me know that too. We talked about a few minor lore points, so if you have anything to add to that discussion, the comment section below is the perfect place to do that. But thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.